Hello creatives, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be creating a magazine layout and I'm going to show you a few basics on how to do this. Starting over here on the right, this is your pages panel where you can see all your spreads and the cover. Right now, let's go ahead and look at these. I do have a column grid set up already on this. It is a 4-column grid, as you can see here, on each page. If you hear beeping, ignore it, it's just my computer. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the cover, and I have already chosen items that I have imported into the program. First, if you want to set up your own guides, go ahead and click on Layout, and then you're going to go and click on Margins and Columns. And you can choose however many columns you want. I chose 4. I just find it easier to work with. Typically 3 or 4 is best. You can work with 2 columns, but it may be a little trickier if you are new to the program. And down here I do have my swatches panel, and I also have my layers panel. You want to make sure you put everything on separate layers so that way you can more easily control them and switch them on and off if you want to switch things up. Let's see, I'm going to be making up a company, and that company is going to be Mercury. Now, if you notice here in the layers panel, I do have the text layer selected, and that is important. Make sure you have your layers named so that you can keep track of where you're at. And with the layers panel, they always make sure that everything's color coded so that way you can tell which is on what layer. These panels are also very easy to manipulate, so you can pull them off from the sidebars, you can move them around wherever you want to, and then you can put them right back onto the sidebars. So let's go ahead and choose the shape tool. It's shaped like a rectangle, and I'm going to pull that over the entire cover. And I'm going to change the color a few times just to see what I prefer. Now if you zoom in, you can see that this shape has an outline, which I do not want. I don't want an outline because you're not going to see the edging of the color. There's not going to be a border around the color. So I'm going to go ahead and switch that off. And something that's really important is to make sure that if you're putting a solid color down over an entire page, make sure you pull the bounding box. So when you click on the box with the selection tool, you see these corners go live. You click and drag those corners to the bleed line. The bleed line, which I will show you here in a second, is a imaginary line. You can't see it when things are printed, but you can see it in the program, and that's just to give you an extra bit of space so that when you print, if things get offset printed, you don't have a white border around your page that's uneven. See the bleed line here? It's highlighted, I think it's pink or red. That's the bleed line. So you want to pull any color to that bleed line. That way you don't have like a random streak of white on one edge of the paper. That's not supposed to be there if the whole page is supposed to be one color. Now that we have that base color down, I did change the color to a lighter color there. And I'm going to go to another layer. I'm going to go ahead and change the layer name of the background to background because it was just like layer whatever number, and I'm going to type in background. I'm then going to select another layer, and I'm going to rename that cover text, and cover text is going to be the text or the type that is going to be on the cover only. So let's go ahead and choose that type tool that looks like a T. I'm going to click and drag to create a text box. It's important to do this off of the page because you want to make a text box. You don't want the text to be bound in the shape you just created. And then I'm going to write out the name Mercury. So from here, you can do a few things. You can change the font. You can change the bounding box, which is this orange box that seems to be around the font. To do that, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can right click on the text box and you can choose fitting and then fit frame to content. You can go up to object on the top panel here, click on fitting and fit frame to object, or if you are keyboard savvy, you can press and hold Control-Alt-C on your keyboard and it'll do the same thing. Or you can press Command-Alt-C if you're on a Mac. So all this does is it takes the text box and it fits it closer to the text. That way you don't have any wasted space and it's a lot easier to select and move around and you don't end up accidentally selecting other things when you're selecting your text. Now I'm going to change the font to a brush script font just to make it look a little fancy. I'm going to move the text across the page and I'm going to flip it by selecting it with the selection tool, clicking and dragging one corner and aligning it vertically here in the center. So you can press Control and Shift to expand the font if you don't want to do it by point system under the character style or the character selection here in the properties panel. And then to align it perfectly centered on the page, you're going to go down to the Align section here in the properties panel, click and make sure that first icon is aligned to page and not aligned to selection. And then you're going to press the two middle alignments and that way it's perfectly aligned in the middle of the page like you see here. If you want to see everything without the grids, then you can just go to View and Screen Mode and Preview, and it'll pop that up. Now let's go ahead and add a shape. I want to add this little illustrated Mercury planet that I created earlier. I'm going to lighten up the background there just from the color that I selected from the planet. And that's looking pretty good with the way I placed it, but let's change it up a little bit. I want the planet to be a bit more of a weight on the page. So let's just see how the placement works here. I'm just going to mess with this for a little bit. Now, if you want to bring more emphasis to a shape, if it's going to be behind text, I do suggest adding a drop shadow. In the Properties panel, there is a little section where you can choose the FX button and you can add a drop shadow to that and mess with all of the things in there. I'm going to continue to mess with the placement of all of these objects and I'm going to mess a little bit with the font, just changing the color like we did earlier and seeing what layout works best here on the cover. I think I'm pretty happy with the way this is turning out, where you have weight on the top of the page and on the bottom of the page because of the color change in the font and then the weight of the object on the top. And that's what the cover is looking like. So let's go ahead to the spread where we're going to learn a few new tricks that are old favorites. I'm going to start on this first page. I'm going to make visible this little logo that I have here for Mercury. I created this previously. And I'm going to add another text box here in the center, give it that brush script font, and it's going to say communication is our priority because I'm making this up as a communications company. So I just increased the weight of that text and everything for that you can find right there in the Properties panel. Super easy to find. You add a stroke to it, makes it thicker. And then let's add a text box like we had before. It's the same process. Press the T tool, the text tool, and then you click and drag for a text box, and then there is a Fill with Placeholder text button right here in the Properties panel all the way to the bottom. You click that and it just fills it with text. And it's not always in English, but hey, if you don't have the information to plug in yet, you just put placeholder text in it and at least you have your template set up and already ready to go for when you do need to put information, real information in there. So it's a little trick there. Now we're going to learn how to do text wrapping. If you do not have the text wrap window box available to you, go to Window, click Text Wrap under that pop-up menu. And then you're going to choose all the text boxes that you want to wrap text around. And we're going to wrap the text around that colored quote there where it says communication is our priority. So I'm going to press the second selection here and that's what it does. It wraps the text around the main box there to create emphasis on the page of what the key message is. And that's all there is to text wrapping. It's very, very simple. You can go ahead and mess with all the spacing, the leading, the kerning, and left indent, right indent. All those little features are there in the Properties panel for you to give yourself more space on the left or the right of that bounding box that you wrap the text around. Now, moving forward from that, we are going to learn how to do drop caps. Drop caps you see all the time in magazines. It is right here on the Properties panel under the Paragraphs section right here. Now, under the drop cap selection, you can increase the first letter of a paragraph, and I typically like to keep it to 3 lines, but you can make it more. I also like to coordinate colors, so I will change the color of that first letter to the same color as we have the quote in, just to make it all cohesive. So this is looking very clean now, and you can give yourself more space between that first letter that you made into a drop cap. You can do the second letter if you so choose. You can increase it up to 5 lines. You can play with this however you want. But I don't want it to fight with the emphasized text there in the center, so I'm going to bring it back down to 3 lines. And it seems to look pretty good sitting there. Let's go ahead and move on to the second page. Well, technically it's the third page, but I'm going to duplicate that planet shape that we had before. And I had already had this set up, so I just made it visible. And I'm going to set that on that third page there. With the text boxes, I am making sure that I give the bottom of the page some breathing space, so I just pulled the text box up a little bit. That also allowed for that red box to pop up where you click that and it creates another text box, and you can click that onto the third page there. So I just extended that text box to include 2 columns like we have set on page 2. And let's go ahead and just reposition this. I wanted the planet, in hindsight, I wanted the planet to go behind the text to emphasize the text more and give a little bit more, movement to the page. So I took the shape and went down the Properties panel selections, and I decided to take off the drop shadow, and instead I decreased the opacity by about, I think it was 30%, 20%. And that way it's lighter, so you can read the text on top of it better. I also made sure that the shape layer is behind the text layer here. And there's more placeholder filler text as well, so whenever you need to fill a box, you just click the text box and press that Fill with Placeholder text button. Now here's an important note. You never want to have one word left on a line by itself. That is a big no-no in the design community. So depending, you may need to manipulate your paragraphs with the settings in the paragraphs section on the Properties panel. But because this is not important information, it's just placeholder text, I just deleted it. This is how you set up a magazine layout. Even if you don't have the proper information ready and waiting for you, you can always use that placeholder text until you can get the information that's supposed to be in the document. So this is exactly how you can manipulate objects. You can utilize text wrapping, your drop caps, create an effective cover, and manipulate fonts. So this is everything basics in InDesign to create a magazine layout. And this is what it's going to look like when it is printed out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope it was informative. Go ahead and leave me a like and subscribe if you would like to, and I will see you all in the next one.